Okay, and we started putting up this other thing now. My son and I have a podcast, which we call Around the Shabbos Table. We're actually recording one tomorrow with another one of our sons. So a bunch of us are going to be basically we sit around, we chew out issues, and you take a look at it and see if you find it interesting. It's also we happen to be sticking. It's on any podcast. You can find it anywhere where you find podcasts. But we're also we're putting it up on my YouTube channel also, so it happens to be up there now. Okay, a couple of quick commercials. So we spoke about last week. Last week, what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. Midas Dom, and we basically spoke about whether I'm doing things for me or for you. Okay, well, fine. This week we talk also in the number 4, and in the number 4 that we talk about here is we say that there are Arba Midos Bideos. Arba Midos Bideos means there are 4 types of temperaments. Now, why we're talking about temperaments is what I'm going to talk about tonight. But there are 4 characteristics in temperaments, 4 types of temperaments within people. Noach lichos v'noach lirtzos, a person who is easily angered and easily appeased. Yotza scharo behefsedo. So the reward that he gains because he is easily appeased is lost. It's offset by the fact that he is easily angered. So the fact that he flies off the handle quickly is really diminished by the fact that he is the fact that he is able to be calmed down is diminished by the fact that he flies off the handle easily. So in the end, it's a negative sum game. Number 2, kasha lichos, if it is hard to get a person angry. A person is normally in control, normally not an angerable person, v'kasha lirtzos. But when that person gets angry, it's very difficult to calm the person down. Then yotze hefsedo b'scharo. So his loss is offset by his gain. Even though it's hard to appease him, but since it doesn't happen often, his gain is greater, and it's a positive sum game. So that it's certainly better. That category, so to speak, is better. Okay. Then caution number 3, kasha lichos. If it is hard to anger you, v'noach lirtzos, but easy to appease you, that's a chassid, that's pious. Noach lichos, and if it is easy to anger you, v'kasha lirtzos, and hard to appease you, then that is a rasha, that is a wicked person. Those are the 4 midos bideos, the 4 characteristics in temperament. Now, in the beginning of this chapter, we learned about Ba'asara ma'amaros nivra olam. In the 10 utterances, the world was created. And we said that why did we need to know that the world was created with 10 utterances, that he said, Vayomer Hashem, and God said 10 times. Why was that an important thing? So we said that the reason that was important was to understand the Kidei Lihipara me'harishayim, in order to take payment back from the wicked and to give schar tov, good reward for the righteous. Now, what did we say that meant? What we said that meant was that the wicked should know how special the world was, that it was created with 10 utterances of God, and that when they toy with the world, when they tamper with the world through their negative actions and bringing negativity and negative energy into the world, they are tampering with something precious, something special, something unique, and therefore they're going to be compensated. They're going to have to pay back for the level of damage that they have done, and that they're going to have to pay back for these 10 utterances. In other words, the 10 foundations of the world. And the righteous people need to know that they're going to be rewarded for this incredible, when everything they've done is to support this world and to make sure and to ensure the longevity of this world and the continuation of this world, they have to know that they're going to receive tremendous rewards for that. Then the Tana of the Mishnah went on, when we hit number 7, to explain the puranios, the punishments, and some of the negative things that are brought into the world. Mida keneged mida, measure for measure. We talked about pestilence, and we talked about disease, and we talked about all kinds of things that are brought into this world because of the Rishayim, because of the wicked, in order to be able to bring into fruition sort of that promise in Mishnah number 1, tamper with the world and you suffer on many levels. And then it's like described in the 7s of the levels that you're going to suffer for tampering with the world. Now, the Mishnayos deal with the righteous that are going to receive schar tov, they're going to receive this good reward, so that we can identify what is a righteous person and what is a wicked person. Because if God made this promise that the righteous people are going to be rewarded, the wicked people are going to be suffered, who are the righteous people? And how do you become one of them? How do you get on the righteous team? It's not as simple, many people think that it is, but it's not as simple as just saying, I'm religious. I'm on the righteous team. You could be religious and be a Schwanz Bagel also, right? It doesn't mean just because you're religious and you're keeping the commandments, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden, you're a righteous person. You could have many, being missing many things and not necessarily be on the righteous team. So what gets you on the righteous team? And that's what the number 4 Mishnayos, this whole section, that's what they are going to be dealing with. How do you identify a righteous person? And in essence, the way you identify a righteous person is through their midos. It's through their attributes and their characteristics. Last week, we spoke about a general characteristic, which was not only a Jewish characteristic. It wasn't just about ritual mitzvahs. It was really about the way that you perceive your place in this world and your relationships to other people. Was it about me or was it about you? Does a person say that I'm worried that you should be an independent person? That's what we talked about last week. I'm worried that you should be an independent person, or I'm worried that I should be an independent person and you shouldn't be a pain in my neck. And is the world about me or is the world about you? And that's step number 1 to becoming a righteous person. This week is step number 2 in becoming a righteous person. How is this a step to righteousness? Having a good temperament, having a control on anger, it's an important thing, but there's a lot of things that are important that are not in this list of 6 things that are the key things that a person has to have a strong foundation in. Why is this one of them? That's question number 1. Question number 2, you have to really look at this Mishnah very, very carefully. And hopefully you have the enough of the text in front of you that you can deal with it. But it's really the Mishnah lists 4 things. The first one that we spoke about was that it's easy to anger and easy to calm down. And we said that was the gain was outweighed by the loss. The loss was greater. Kasha lichos, a person it was hard to anger, but easy to calm them down. So we said that the loss was outweighed by the gain. Now, why are those 2 really different from each other? Think about number 1. A person is easily angered, easily calmed down. That means they spend a good amount of their time ticked off, a good amount of the time raging, a good amount of the time upset about the things that are happening to them. Well, look at number 2. It might be hard to get them angry, but once you get them angry, they're holding on to that for could be years. So they're really both walking around with anger their entire lives. One of them is constantly getting into anger. One of them is constantly staying in anger. But at the end of the day, if you took in a moment amount, they're very similar people. They're fabissina people. You walk into a room, so this one you have to worry you're gonna take him off, and the other one you have to worry about what's he ticked off about now. Like, what did I do 27 years ago that he's still mad at me about, right? But they're both angry people. They're both holding on to their anger. So why are we listing them as 2 separate people? Okay, and I'm saying that one of them is better than the other. Why is one of them better than the other? That's my second problem. My third problem is look at this very carefully. Numbers 1 and numbers 2, we're not really giving a value judgment. At the end of the day, we're saying that number 1 is worse than number 2. Number 2 is better than number 1. But we're not calling him good or bad. We're just saying that he loses more, he gains more. Numbers 3 and 4, we're calling them a tzaddik and a rasha, a righteous person and a wicked person. First of all, what's the real difference between them? That these two have no value judgment to them, and then the second two have value judgment. They're righteous and wicked. Why does that make you, numbers 3 and 4, why does that make you righteous and wicked? What about that makes you righteous and wicked? What about a person who is difficult to anger but easy to appease? Then what is that? How does that make you a righteous person? And a person who's easy to anger and difficult to appease, how does that make you wicked? You're a pain in the behind, whatever. But it doesn't mean that you're righteous or wicked. I wouldn't think. How does this make you righteous or wicked? My fourth problem is that how do you be called righteous or wicked based on one characteristic? Because you can control your anger and not control your anger? Oh, you're a tzaddik. It's like what you do to a child. You ask a child to pick the toys up, and the child picks them up. You say, "Oh, you're such a tzaddik." Halavai, it should be so easy. Pick up the toys, you become a tzaddik. It doesn't work that way. Life doesn't work that way. So, but the Mishnah is saying that. The Mishnah is saying, we did it last week too, by the way. We were talking about one characteristic, and we said if you have this one characteristic, you're a tzaddik. Why is it called a tzaddik? Why is it called a chassid, a pious person? And why is a person who doesn't have this characteristic, why are they called a rasha? Why are they called a wicked person? And what characteristic is really being portrayed here? Is it all about anger or non-anger? About the ability to control or not to control your anger? Is that where the world is rising and falling? Where your life is elevated or depressed? Is that what it's all about? Okay. So I'll tell you that what's being spoken about in this Mishnah is something much deeper than anger. And I'm going to spend a lot of time on anger. I don't know if we're going to get through it all tonight. It could be that next week we might have to do part 2 of this, but let's see what we can accomplish now. But at the end of the day, what we're speaking about here is really when we say that there are 4 types of temperaments, that means that there are 4 types of natural tendencies and inclinations. In truth, there's really 2 types of inclinations and then 2 ways that we deal with those types of inclinations. And let me unfold that. A person who is noach lichos, number 1, a person who is easily angered, is constantly flying into a rage. He's an emotional person. He spends much of his time being controlled by his emotions as opposed to controlling his emotions. When he realizes that he's hurt you, and he realizes that he has, in his anger, completely lost sight of reality, that he has done things in his anger that are hurtful and that in many situations can't even be fixed. So then he calms down. But he's not being calmed down. He's not being appeased because he is intellectually in control of himself. He's being appeased because emotionally he understands that he did something wrong. And now he feels bad. His emotions of feeling bad, his emotions of remorse are taking over. He is an emotional person who is guided and controlled by his emotions. And that, the Mishnah tells us, is not good or bad. It is a natural state. There are people like that. There are people that are emotional people that are guided by their emotions, not guided by their intellect, and their emotions push them into places, understand that it's dangerous, Understand that your loss is, or the gain is offset by the loss. In the big picture, this is a tough way to live, but nevertheless, it's not good or bad. It is a natural state of a person. The same is true for number two. Kasha lichos, a person who it's difficult to get them angry. That's a person whose nature is such that it's hard to anger that person. You know, there are people that are just water off the duck's back. You could say things to the person, you could do things, and it's not because they're so kind and so beautiful, but they're not guided by their emotions. They're a little more heady. They're a little more being guided by their intellect, and in general, they're able to maintain control and maintain equilibrium. For that person, he is a kasha lichos. It's difficult to get him angry. But when he gets angry, because he's not being guided by his emotions, so then for that person, it's very difficult to calm them down, because it's not about emotions, it's about intellect. And it is about thinking, and a person can think themselves into crazy places and crazy boxes. That person, though, most of their lives are in control. And again, it's a natural state. And as tough as that might be, that when they get angry, it's very hard to get them out. They bear grudges. They hold on to that for a long time. But nevertheless, that is not as bad as number one. And in the total sum of things, in the total scheme of things, that's really a person gains more than what they lose. Notice carefully, as we mentioned, there's no value judgment. It's just losing more or gaining more. But this is your base, it's your nature. And the Mishnah identifies that there are two types of people. There are emotional people, and there are less emotional people. Now, it's a spectrum, so you fall somewhere on that spectrum, but the extreme is the person who is overly emotional, and to the other extreme is the person who is almost never emotional. Beautiful. But now let's see what you do with that nature. What do you do with a nature that's emotional or with a nature that is not emotional? So the Mishnah presents 3 and 4. Kasha lichos, a person who is very difficult to get angry. And what did we say about a person who's difficult to get angry? That's a person who's not an emotional person. Natural state, what should they be? When it comes to appeasement, it should be difficult to get to appease them, because a person who is non-emotional, you're not going to be able to calm him down so fast. Yet look at this person. He's a kasha lichos. It's hard to get him angry, but once you get him angry, it's a noach lirtzos. You're able to get him to calm down. Now, if he's an emotional person, how are you able to get him to calm down so fast? And look at number 4. If you are easy to anger, that means you're an emotional person. An emotional person, it should be easy to appease. But you're kasha lirtzos. You're difficult to appease. Why are you difficult to appease? That's a rasha. What happened here? What the Mishnah is describing is a person who has decided to go against their nature. A person who's decided to control their nature, to be able to rise above their nature. A person who's decided to do that for good, that's a chassid. That's a person who is a pious person. You're not pious in one thing. You're pious in everything. Because if you have the ability when it comes to anger, which we'll learn about in a minute, if you have the ability in the arena of anger to say that I'm not going to be bounded by my nature and I'm going to push myself beyond my limitations, beyond my comfort zone, I'm going to step outside of my box in order to be able to back off of my anger, in order to be able to help another person, in order to be able to try to fix a damage that I've caused, you'll do it in every area of your existence. You're not going to stop just when it comes to this. This is part of who you are. You're a person who understands that you've got to go beyond your nature. Your natural state might be this, but you can't let it control you. You have to control it. When you do that for the good of others and the good of yourself, so then that is a chassid. But when you do it in order to be able to hold on to your negativity, to be able to dig your feet, your heels into the ground, then that, unfortunately, is called a rasha. That's a wicked person. Because that's a person who says that I'm going to control my nature, but I'm going to control my nature in order to cause devastation and to cause ruin to others. That is a rasha. It's not one area. It's not only about anger. It's not really even about anger. It's about controlling your nature and rising above your nature for good or rising above your nature for negativity. If you're a Noach Lirtzos, if you are a person who's easily angered, you're emotional, you should be a Noach Lirtzos. You should be a person, if you're Noach Lichos, excuse me. If you're an easily angered person, you should be able to be appeased easily. And if not, then you have made a decision to go against your nature, to commit evil. And that's called a rasha. That's called a wicked person. So really what the Mishnah is telling me is that there are two temperaments. There's emotional and there's not emotional. But those two temperaments can then be controlled, or those natures can be controlled. And those natures, whether it's good or bad, on that we put a value judgment. There you can go against your temperament. When you go against your temperament, when you go against your nature for good, that's a tzaddik, that's a chassid. And when it's for bad, it's a rasha. And really what this mission is telling me is that if you want to move towards becoming a tzaddik, you've got to be in control. You can't let your emotions control you. You can't let your intellect control you. You have to be in control. You have to feel and understand a situation to the extent that you are able to control it. You have to recognize that I am what I am, which is accepting a difficult way of life. I am what I am. I'm an emotional person, or I am not an emotional person. But I don't necessarily want to be what I am. And therefore, I'm going to combat against it. And when I combat against it for positive, that's a chassid. For negative, that is a rasha. And the Mishnah is really teaching me about self-control, about recognizing my nature and what happens when we let that nature go and what happens when we control them. This concept of greatness lying in the controls of our nature is a basic tenet in the Jewish perspective, in the Torah perspective of character development. We see by Avraham Avinu. We learned, for those that have been hanging on, we learned a few months ago that Avraham Avinu had 10 tests. And one of the tests was that he was thrown into a fiery furnace. He was thrown into a fiery furnace because he believed in God, and he was challenged by Nimrod that does he really believe in God? And he said yes. Nimrod told him, if you say that you believe in God, I'm going to throw you into fiery furnace. And Avraham Avinu didn't care. He was willing to stand apart from everyone else. Another one of the tests was that he had to leave his country, lech lecha me'artzecha, leave his father, leave his father's land, leave his home, leave everything he knew, everybody behind, and follow God. One of the tests was that he had to have a bris milah, he had to have a circumcision. One of the which set him apart from the whole world. There was nobody who was circumcised up until then. It wasn't like, people had a medical choice. There was nothing. The concept of circumcision didn't yet exist in the world. The only other person up until then that was circumcised was Adam. And not because he had surgery. He was born mohel. It's a whole nother story. But he was born with a bris milah. He was born circumcised. There was no circumcision. So Avraham Avinu had to do something that was going to set him apart from the whole world. He had to take his beloved child and bring him up to the top of a mountain and to slaughter him. If you look at these tests very carefully, every single one of these tests was forcing Avraham to go against his nature. What was the nature of Avraham? Was kindness. His nature was chesed. He was the omud ha-chesed. He was the pillar of kindness. And he was asked to do something that was the exact polar opposite of being kind. Because what God was saying to Avram, is that if you want to achieve greatness, you've got to be able to be in control of your nature and climb above it. Working with your nature, developing your natural inclinations and talents is a beautiful thing. But greatness lies when you're able to control it and say, my natural inclination would be to do this, but I know that the situation demands me to do something other than that, and to have the strength to be able to go against that natural inclination. That's where greatness lies. We see this by Yaakov. Yaakov was an ish emes. He was a person of truth. He was an ish tam yoshev olim. He was a simple person that sat in the tents. And now one of the things that he was demanded to do was to dress up like his brother and surreptitiously get the bracha from his father. This shook the very foundations of who Yaakov was and what he represented in this world. Yet he understood that there are times where you need to step out of your comfort zone. There are times where you need to step beyond what is natural to you. Again, perfecting your nature. If you're a person who's a kind person, you're a good person, to develop the goodness is very critical. But that's just developing the gift that God gave you. The real greatness comes when you're a kind person and you are forced in a situation to do something that is the opposite of kindness. That's where ultimately that's where greatness lies. Did you ever have a situation where you looked at it and you say, that's out of my comfort zone? You have to talk to a person. You have to do something with another person. You have to make a certain telephone call, or you have to go visit someone in a hospital which you're not comfortable with, or you have to go pay a shiva call which you're not comfortable with. And you say to yourself, but I know that this is the thing that I need to do. And you step beyond your comfort zone. You feel like $1 million. You feel greater than just when you do the things that come to you naturally. You feel good about that, but after a while, it's natural. It's part of you, right? You're a person who's a people person. You love talking to people, right? So you talk to a person, it's great, but you're naturally, you bristle at a certain type of person. And you say to yourself, you know what? I know that that's the kind of person that makes me crazy, but you know what? I'm going to be kind to that person. You feel amazing when you're able to do that. Because again, being able to go against our natures, that's where greatness lies. We see this by Moshe. What do we say about Moshe? How do we describe Moshe? This week's parsha, right? We're starting off with Moshe. It's amazing that we're up to that already, right? We were just talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and now we're already holding by Moses and slavery, and Passover is on its way. I mean, it's like wild. And in Moshe, we find out that what was Moshe's real midah? What was his characteristic? most humble of all men. What is humility? Humility is the sense that you are nothing more than a small cog in a big wheel. You know your place, you understand who you are, you understand your place in the world, you understand your place in God's world. And what did God demand of Moshe? To put himself out as a leader of people. Not Moshe's natural state. It's not the natural state of a humble person to be able to enforce his leadership, to be able to be able to corral and to push people and to cajole them and encourage them and drag them. Not really part of the MO of a person who is the most humble, not a humble, the most humble person. God gave him this task to be the leader of the Jews, and by definition, to control his nature and step beyond it. And that's why Moshe is called not Uncle Mo, he's called Moshe Rabbeinu, because he was our ultimate teacher, not only our teacher of Torah, not only our teacher of the one who delivered the Torah to us, but a teacher of how you have to live and exist in the world, and you have to have the strength to be in control of who you are. The Torah gives us some negative examples also. Bilam, the wicked prophet Bilam, he was a prophet. He spoke to God, not something you and I get to do often, right? He was a real prophet. His girlfriend or boyfriend was his donkey. I mean, he was not like of the 10 most moral people in Jewish history. He wasn't Jewish, we understand, but he was an immoral, disgusting human being who ended up trying to curse the Jews, and he gave us these most amazing blessings. You ever hear? I could sing many different tunes, but Matovu o Alecha Yaakov, Mishkan Osecha Yisrael. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. It's printed in the Siddur. We say it at the beginning of our davening. When you walk into a shul, if you're not planning on staying inside of the shul, you're just going to walk through. So then their custom is to stop, sit down for a moment, so you don't just use the shul as a shortcut, and to say that pasuk, Matovu o Alecha Yaakov, Mishkan Osecha Yisrael. It's a beautiful, beautiful pasuk. It was said by this person, this lowlife. Bilam was a lowlife, but he had such incredible potential because he had a relationship with God. The only other person who had that kind of relationship with God was Moshe. So the second guy in the tier of prophecy at that point wasn't Aaron and Miriam. The second guy was Bilam. And yet, with all of that, Bilam didn't have the ability to be able to use the tools that were given him to step beyond his nature, but he gave in to his nature, and he let it overtake him, and to shape who he became, he had no control over himself. There's an amazing story in the Torah called the golden calf. When the people had an idea, 40 days after the Torah was given to the Jews, and that they saw divine revelation, they saw God. 40 days later, they had an idea that they wanted to build a golden calf. The women refused to participate in the golden calf. Now, what's amazing, if you look at the words of the Torah, it says that where did they get the gold to build the golden calf? They got it from the women. How can you tell me then the women refused? Because they wouldn't give a thing. The men, if you look at the wording of the Torah, they went over to the women and they pulled off their earrings and their nose rings and their jewelry, and they took it because the women wouldn't give it to them, and they used that to build the golden calf. Right after the golden calf, because of the sin of the golden calf, of an inability to be able to see God And therefore they needed a focal point. That's why they were building the golden calf. It wasn't pure idolatry. They were building it because they needed a focal point. They needed something that they could relate to because they thought Moses had died. So they needed something that they could relate to, which would then represent God. So what was the antidote? The medicine for the golden calf was the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Because now God gave them a place, a kosher place, to go and to find him. When it came to building the temple, the Torah tells us that the women gave more than the men, and that the women gave in abundance to the extent, by the way, this was the only time in Jewish history that this happened, that there was a building campaign and they had to tell the people to stop donating because they had too much money. Not a Jewish thing. Nobody ended up in jail. Nobody was taking anything that didn't belong to them. Like, it's like amazing. The whole parsha is like an amazing thing. And the women gave more than the men. Then we're told that at the end of all of this, the women were rewarded. And they were given the Rosh Chodesh as the women's holiday. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov got the Shalosh Regalim, the three pilgrimage festivals, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, and the women were given the gift of Rosh Chodesh. Why only then? And they only got that gift of Rosh Chodesh at the very end when the temple was erected, when the temple went up. Until then, they didn't get it. What's going on here? What's going on is something amazing. Because when they didn't participate in the golden calf, it's very possible that there are two explanations for why they didn't participate. One was because they objected. They were conscientious objectors. They said, this is against our principles. We would never participate in something like this. The other is that they were cheap. And that they weren't getting jewelry to build a golden calf. You out of your mind? I'm not giving up my jewelry. I'm not giving up my gold and my diamonds. Get out of here. When it came time to build the Mishkan, they also had two choices. They could have said, we don't donate to this kind of stuff, man. We're cheap. Or they could have said, for this, there's no question we would give. Well, one of them was that they didn't give because they conscientiously looked at it and they said they couldn't participate. But how did I know that was the reason that they didn't participate? And it wasn't because they were cheap, because when we saw the level to which they gave, it became clear that they had no problem giving, but they wouldn't give to the Mishkan. They wouldn't give to the golden calf, which means that when it came to the golden calf, they went against their natures. They were, by definition, giving people. Look at the extent that they gave for the Mishkan, for the tabernacle. They gave free will. They gave unending. They gave without boundaries because they were giving people. But they had to pull back. They had to go against their natures because they refused to be involved in something that was evil. And that's why they were rewarded with 12 times a year a recognition of the power and the value of the Jewish woman. That holiday became their holiday because they went against their natures. At the end of the day, that's what this Mishnah is teaching me. The Mishnah is teaching me that what is the second step that you need to take to be in that camp called the camp of the righteous? The second step is that the first step was last week. You need to understand the difference between doing something for me and doing something for you. And then step number two is that you need to be in control of your comfort zone, control of your nature, and to be able to rise above that nature to do good in order to be able to achieve greatness. And that's what this mission is talking about. That's step number 2. Now, what needs to be understood, which we have not yet, is that why is all of this taking place within a discussion about anger? If you're telling me to control my nature, you could have taught it to me about being cheap. You could have taught it to me about being kind. There are so many places, so many middos that you could have talked to me about going against my nature. Why did this lesson have to come out of anger? And that's what we'll discuss next week. Because there is a special reason when we understand what anger is and what the devastating nature of anger is. What most people think the devastating nature of anger is that it destroys other people. It does. But the real collateral damage of anger is that it completely destroys ourselves. And we'll understand that in a better way in Mirz Hashem next week. Okay, my thoughts. Everybody should have a beautiful, amazing, wonderful week. And in Mirz Hashem, I'll still be in America next week. And same time, same bad channel.
Enjoy Simcha, Rabbi.
Amen. Thank you very much.
Safe travels. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Bye.
Nice to see
Rabbi.
Awesome to see everybody.
Thank you so much and Mazel Tov.
Thank you.
Mazel tov, yes.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.